Kia ora and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We are The Niche Cache. We're always writing about Kiwi sports at theniche-cache.com, and we love Kiwi sports, especially around the Olympic time when we have lots of Kiwis doing fantastic things at the Olympics. And for the Olympics, we will be doing a almost daily Olympics podcast on our Patreon page. So if you want to first and foremost support the Niche Cache and what we're doing in broadcasting Aotearoa's sporting excellence, you can donate every month for $1 a month via Patreon, patreon.com/LEL Niche Cache. And also on Patreon, you get the almost daily podcast as well. So it's a double banger of good juju. Every Monday and Friday, we are delivering our email via Substack, www.thenichecache.substack.com. Whack in your email, and then every Monday and Friday afternoon, you'll get the Niche Cache just delivered to your email instead of having to look anywhere else. So we also do some extra yarns there, which are always fun to follow and update Kiwi sporting matters as well. Today, we're here to talk some Kiwi sporting topics, as per usual, and we also have a motorway of mindfulness from the wildcard. Wildcard, can you please take us for a trip down the motorway of mindfulness?
The motorway of mindfulness today brought to you by Mr. Socrates, who said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new."
Oh, crikey Jack. That's simple. It's just clear, concise, and fitting, I believe. There's a bit of change happening in the world at the moment, so embrace the new.
Yeah, there's only ever change happening. It's not like anything ever sits still and waits for people to catch up, you know. It's always moving in one direction, and that is not backwards. And Mr. Socrates, I suppose, would have had a good time building the motorways, given that would have been change for him, I suppose.
Definitely. I would have loved to know what Socrates and his friends thought of the Auckland motorway at 6 p.m. on a weekday evening.
I can't help but think he would have looked at it as a great failure of humanity.
I beg to differ. I think he would have welcomed it, and
well, I think the car part of it, he'd probably be pretty impressed with the cars. I do think about that sometimes, like how like, I don't know, an easier way to put the context of this is like, you know, when you get people making a movie based on like an old book and the author's been dead for 50 years or something like that. And I wonder, like, what would the author actually think of like this rendition of their work? Or, in this case, what would Socrates think of the modern world? Who knows? Other than Bill and Ted, because in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they did actually pick up Mr. Socrates and then took him into the future. Probably not an accurate representation.
That same idea applies to like cover songs. Like, what would
yeah, true, for sure.
Whoever think of how Jimmy's covering a song in the top 100. On Socrates, I was meaning like it's a practice. It's a task. It's a challenge to in a mindfulness sense, like just stay present and not get washed up in all the energy of the fucked up motorway. In a Socrates or in a Greek Stoic type of thing, it would have been a exercise in discipline and control. So I think he would have welcomed it, not just for like, oh my gosh, we got cars, even though I thought we were going to have flying cars by now. But we got cars, we got congestion on the motorway, it's cool, and I'm going to use this time to deepen my studies. He'd be listening to audiobooks, he'd be fucking, like, that hour on the motorway in traffic for Socrates or anyone else of his ilk would be just pure learning time.
Yeah, maybe the rest of us sort of take that lesson as well and get some learning time going when we're stuck in traffic. I normally do, to be fair. Like I'm pretty good at avoiding traffic because I just will not go out in the times when it is going to be an issue. But But when I do, you chuck on a podcast and you just hang out with the company of whatever you've happened to choose to listen to. Learn a few things as you go. It's productive time after all.
I have learned a few things, but I think it's the same. I learn these same things on a 4-year cycle, and I learn many things on a 4-year cycle because we have the Olympics, and Olympics means Olympic basketball. And I'm just curious, Wildcard, how aware are you of the rule differences between NBA basketball and Olympic basketball? And I believe Olympic basketball just adopts the FIBA international rules. So it's basically NBA basketball versus FIBA international basketball. Like, do you know much about the rule differences there?
Yeah, like there's rules about goaltending is a little bit different. I think the 3-point line might be slightly different. Little things like that, and just because how the NBA is like the NRL and like the NFL and all these sports where they like to just keep constantly changing rules and tweaking things, and obviously FIBA doesn't get caught up in the same just like wash of this needs to be different, this needs to be different, this needs to be different for the next season. We're going to bring in this rule, this rule, this rule, and this rule, and we're going to change this interpretation and all that kind of thing. FIBA don't get caught up in that. It is generally a more free flowing sort of game. I think there's fewer timeouts, or at least they don't have like TV timeouts and things like that, and just like extra stoppages and referee reviews and things like that, which aren't strictly about the game, but are definitely about like the game and how you enjoy it, like watching at home. And to be honest, like the NBA, I think these NBA playoffs have been pretty fantastic. Like it's really fun seeing different people competing in the finals and deep in the playoffs and all of this, and new stars emerging, and et cetera, et cetera. That's cool. I really enjoyed that. But you get games where it's like it takes 20 minutes to play the last 90 seconds of clock time, and it's just you know who's probably going to win because one team's like 6 points up, but you got to play it out, and it's just referee review, who did this ball touch last, and things like that. So I'm not like fully scrubbed up on the differences between the rules. I just sort of I think that mostly affects the players and little things that they have to adjust to. Honestly, I think it's overblown from a fan experience, other than the fact that like you're gonna watch a game of basketball, it's gonna be slightly shorter, but it's gonna feel a lot quicker and a little more action packed, and just fewer silly stoppages and all of that kind of. I mean, there has been a lot of talk, hasn't there, from the American side of things, from like the NBA side of things, about, hey, a few of these FIBA rules are pretty cool, man. Like we could stick with these. We could do what they do and have a slightly better game at the end of it. I don't disagree with that. I think there is a lot to be said for the way FIBA basketball is played compared to some of the stuff where the NBA have maybe done some overcorrections in their rule books.
Yeah, I purely enjoy the difference. Like there is no goaltending. So you can, in international basketball, just like, because goaltending is when the ball falls into the imaginary cylinder of the hoop, you can't touch it. But in FIBA, you can. So that's all good. And I think there's no 3-second defensive rule, which means that in the NBA, the defender can only be inside the key, the colored area in front of the hoop, for 3 seconds, then they have to step out. In FIBA, I think there is no 3-second rule, so you can actually just stay there. So you can just have your big man in front of the hoop the whole time. And then like games in the NBA are 46, 48 minutes. In FIBA, they're like 40 minutes. So suddenly, like the players who, because this is why you see players who might struggle in the NBA, in FIBA, they're all good because you're not going necessarily like, it's not a battle of attrition in a 46, 48, I think it's 48 minutes sense. Be like in the NRL, like Storm versus Panthers, they're going to slug it out for 80 minutes, and then International Rugby League, the equivalent would be, well, what's if we had a 65-minute game? it brings everyone closer together because that attrition factor over a longer period of time is gone. Similar to like T20 cricket, like I'm excited for the T20 World Cup, and every team has. I've got an interesting thought about this as well, where this T20 World Cup, you're seeing Chris Gayle play for West Indies, so you're seeing how these different nations can pull together their T20 mercenaries into their teams to win a World Cup, which is very different from between World Cups where players would rather be T20 mercenaries than play for their nations. When World Cup comes around, it's the job of the nations to get these people back on board to win a T20 World Cup. But T20 cricket brings teams closer together because it's just shorter. More stuff can happen. Whereas Test cricket, it's like, can you be good over 5 days? And that's pretty much what happens in this basketball is like the game is cut down to 40 minutes, so players only have to be good for 40 minutes, let alone the 3-point line, let alone all those other little rule changes, and it's a completely different game that is so much more better suited to Olympics, where you do have very good players around the world. And the other thing about the Olympics is that those teams are always playing together. So that's where you get like Australia actually have combinations, and that's why I'm kind of getting to a point where I just like want to see New Zealand in this space because you're qualifying for the Olympics, you're playing international basketball, FIBA World Cups, and building combinations, and whether it's Luka, whether it's whoever else, like Australia have NBA players as well, but they have been playing with their national team for at least 5 years. And so they're all boys. They all know the plays, they've got chemistry and cohesion. And that makes it really interesting as well, let alone Argentina, Spain, those nations. So I just think it's so perfect for the Olympics, and it creates a whole different feel to a sport that shouldn't necessarily be competitive given the power of the NBA.
Yeah, and those combinations, those ongoing things of having like the same core of players who come back and play in each of these tournaments over and over and over, and like understand how to play with each other, and it makes it easier then to bring in new guys as well to fit around them because there's like a core to build around. Like that's just such a big advantage in an international tournament, and this is part of why you want there to be differences between the NBA and the FIBA stuff, because you want there to be that sort of just a little, you want it to be looser, you want it to be quicker, because it is going to be looser and quicker anyway. You might as well play into that, because teams are only going to have maybe a couple weeks of preparation for what's about a 2-week tournament. That's not a lot. It's not exactly like a full month-long preseason. You're not getting summer leagues before Olympics. You're not getting like, a free agency period to add to the players. You got to work with what you got, and yet you still don't have that much time. So teams that are able to like get that jump start on that, like Australia, who have recurring sort of guys who are at all these tournaments, is such a big advantage. And it's something, to be honest, that USA tends to struggle with, because it's coming from the other side of that thing, where you got to get different, not only different guys, but it's also hard to tell the hierarchy, where you've got, probably a starting five. Like, what kind of, I'm trying to remember what they were rolling out in some of these friendly games. You got like, Kevin Durant's there, Devin Booker, I think, will be there after the NBA finals, Bradley Beal, and just etc. Like guys who are the top scorer for their own team, and then you've got to fit all these guys into one starting five where shots are going to be shared around and things. That's not easy to do, and that's also partly why you don't worry about what America does in their pre-tournament friendly games. It's kind of irrelevant, even though losing to Nigeria and then losing to Australia does make for an interesting little narrative. It's not really something that necessarily affects how they play in the tournament, but it's something that they probably like. They need more time to gel together, but they do also have more overall talent, because it's each one of these guys are coming in as like one of the 2 or 3 best players for a team in the best league in the world. So it's it's pretty easy to eventually make that work. It just takes some time, and probably a little bit of sacrifice on the behalf of each of those players. But I think one thing where it gets quite interesting though is specifically around those like goaltending and defensive 3-second things. That, as you said, like that is a benefit to your big man. If you got a big man who can just sort of hover in there and gobble up rebounds, and that's a pretty big advantage. America, I'm not sure I have one of those though. Like Bam Adebayo is their center. He's fantastic. He's not like 7'2" or anything though. And then you look elsewhere around the NBA, like who are the best centers out there? Well, MVP Nikola Jokic would be one of them. I don't.
Steven Adams.
You could, yeah, Steven Adams, of course, but guys like chuck some Vucevic in there, Rudy Gobert, guys like this, Joel Embiid. Like, what do all these guys have in common? None of them are American. That's an interesting factor, I think, to keep an eye on going into this tournament, because there's a lot of this is the kind of thing where people talk about the 5 position kind of being the traditional big man. The ideas of a traditional big man, at least, not being what they once were. Like, it's so hard to be that kind of player in the NBA these days. Well, it's not quite as hard in FIBA stuff. And America, because of the way the NBA has been going, have a lot of overly skilled big men, but not necessarily overly sized big men. And most of the super skilled big men are guys like Jokic and Embiid coming in from overseas. So it's pretty interesting to see how that little thing will play off, because that is definitely an area other teams will look at the United States and be like, as good as Bam Adebayo is, and he's fantastic, but they're still going to be looking at that area of the game and saying, we can target that, we can get something out of that.
And probably maybe the best big man of them all, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's Greek. So
yeah, I was wondering whether or not to count him or not, because he's sort of, he is a big man and he's not a big man, but he's literally a big man. He's one of those weird positionless guys, but yeah, you might as well count him because he can do those things.
And he's not from America.
And he's not from America.
So that would be, all of that's really encouraging if we can get Steven Adams in the New Zealand team. New Zealand does have a lot of, not necessarily quote-unquote big men, as you said, but bigger men. Not quite as big as Steven Adams, but you look around, especially the NBL, the Australian NBL, there are some big dudes. And especially the dudes who have gone to college in NCAA, there is we do have more bigger dudes as opposed to smaller guards taken up. Like our New Zealand basketball export style is roughly Tom Vodonovich. Bigger dude, grizzly, gets the mahi done, and then the peak of that is Steven Adams, and there's, space in between.
Yeah, Jack Salt, Rob Lowe,
Timmins.
Et cetera.
I've seen Timmins,
sure. Terrell Harrison is another one.
It's tough to see now, but like Ty Wynyards doesn't really look like a factor in the NBL, but he went to NCAA, and he was a massive dude as well. So that does seem like our export style. Interesting thought here, Wildcat. Coming off last weekend's UFC event, I already believe Israel Adesanya is one of the biggest international sports stars in the world, obviously in the world. But I don't think New Zealand really understands his international stardom. So, I'm all on board the Adesanya train, and I think a lot of stuff is perfectly poised with the perceived downfall, demise of Conor McGregor. I think Israel, that's leaving a void for Israel Adesanya to step into. And he's already well and truly on almost there, but he's still got to win fights. He's still got to take this opportunity. So it's kind of perfectly poised right now, and I think there is legit superstardom opportunities for Adesanya given how things have played out. And I wrote about this, and I included what they've both done since 2018. And McGregor, I think he's had 4 fights, 3 losses and 1 win. For Adesanya, he started in the UFC in 2018. So he's literally had, 10, 12 fights since then. And he's lost 1. So like inside the octagon, Adesanya's got the mana, he's got the momentum. He is a champion who wants to keep defending his belt. That is, he has, especially City Kickboxing as well. They have like a martial artist mentality, martial artist approach. They're craftsmen with what they do, and so part of that is like defending your belt against the best in your division is the duty of the champion, and that's what Adesanya will do. And what I believe he intends to do, Wildcard. But at the same time, the biggest thing in combat sports right now is exhibition boxing. Whether you want to call it, like I use exhibition because celebrity is a weird word. YouTube is a weird word as well. These are just people from all corners of life participating in exhibition boxing. And exhibition boxing, we can go back for like Fight for Life, I think it was, when you had like New Zealand sports commentators and former rugby players and just people like that, politicians, fighting each other. And that was like a big Kiwi sporting event, was seeing Stephen McIver get fucked up. You know, like that was a pastime for New Zealand. You look over, Australia is more in a professional boxing space, but the biggest thing in boxing over in Australia is Paul Gallen. Like, yes, they have Tim Tszyu. They've got that dude who beat Paul Gallen, but Paul Gallen he's kind of part of boxing's resurgence in Australia, and maybe Sonny Bill Williams is a big part of that as well. So, let alone the stuff that's happening in USA, where it's really typical exhibition boxing. What do you think Israel Adesanya's record in boxing is, Wildcard? According to Wikipedia, he has a professional boxing record, and I want to know from you, Wildcard, what you believe that record is. So, how many wins and losses, which add up to how many fights has Israel Adesanya had in boxing?
Well, I do know a little bit about this because I know he did some like King of the Ringy type things back in the day. So I'm guessing he did, I don't know, maybe 2 of those, or say it's probably about 5 fights. Then let's go 3-2 or something like that.
He had 6 fights, 5-1. You're correct. There was all the Super 8 boxing tournament between 2014, basically 1 year, from 2014, November 2014 to November 2015. He competed in 3 different Super 8 boxing tournaments. He lost his first fight, which was his only loss, and then he won 4 fights, including a win over Brian Minto, who we have discussed before, fought Joseph Parker later on. So, not only do I believe that Israel Adesanya has an open passage to take over the UFC, take over McGregor, be the UFC's biggest star, like he is signed to Puma, and Puma they signed Virat Kohli, they signed Neymar. That is the company with whom Adesanya kicks it, just with Puma, let alone any other brand. That's all based on his UFC, his cultural, like all the things that go into making a prize fighter so renowned. But that's just in mixed martial arts. And now we're looking at exhibition boxing, which is huge internationally. Like, people just want to see it, regardless of how we feel about it. It's exhibition boxing, fantastic. People really want to see it. I reckon Adesanya could move into that space at some point. Not only is he a showman who can draw in a crowd to make that a valuable and beneficial experience, but he actually has some history in boxing. He trains at City Kickboxing, where Junior Fa trains, where they have a boxing division. So I wouldn't be surprised, let me just say that, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see Israel Adesanya step into boxing, exhibition boxing at some point, given the money that is on offer.
Yeah, it could happen. I'm just looking at Brian Minto's record. He he got a retirement win against Shane Cameron in 2013. His next fight, where are we? About 5 months later, was against Joseph Parker, and he himself was retired in the 7th round. Fast forward a year, basically, from that, and he loses to Israel Adesanya. His very next fight after that was against Dillian White, where he got knocked out in the 3rd round. But that's quite a career that fella had. The life of a journeyman boxer is got to be a crazy one. Yeah, I mean, Adesanya's got a fair way to go to get to that point, I think, because as much money as there might be in just the sort of weirdo, wacky, kind of exhibition-y boxing type scene, like, I think there's probably more in what he's doing right now, and I think he's, I don't know, I don't see him as someone who would take himself less seriously than he should. You know, he's a serious athlete, he knows what he's doing. I would see that more like 5-6 years down the line kind of thing, which is kind of what you can do in boxing. You can just sort of hang around in that kind of scene. But yeah, he's got like, well, I mean, Jesus, like you say that there's nothing Logan Paul can do that Israel Adesanya can't do, right? And can't do a whole lot better than him. I mean, it's so hard to take that stuff in any way, like it's anything other than just a farce, when people are actually talking about, like, well, this Logan Paul dude held his own against Floyd Mayweather. It's like, Floyd Mayweather at one point caught him. Like, he dropped him and then caught him so he didn't fall and get the knockdown. Like, you think Floyd was doing anything other than, like, fighting in his sleep there and just, like, playing for his paycheck and nothing else? You're crazy. Like, that's all that was. And it's just, yeah, it is a major part of boxing, but it shouldn't be, man. It's just so, like, I don't know.
But it is, like, that shows where boxing's at, is that the biggest thing in boxing is the stuff we're getting now. But, like, let me put it this way, if Logan Paul or Jake Paul, whoever wants to, versus Israel Adesanya was going to happen this year, it would, there would be a massive event. And Israel Adesanya would make a lot more money than he makes in anything in the UFC, and it would be the biggest, cultural fight of, like, pop culture. It would be the biggest event of this year, hands down.
I don't know. I think Joshua Fury, if that actually happens, which is a big asterisk at that point, because who bloody knows with those guys. And that's another thing where boxing lets itself down, I would have to say. But I think that would top it. I mean, that would be the biggest heavyweight fight for. That's a boxing purist fight. Like, there are kids who don't have any interest at all in professional boxing, who only know the Paul brothers or Adesanya as people, and they'll, like, that's a whole different audience, let alone the people who want to see fights. Like, I reckon it'd be massive. Well, Anthony Joshua sells out Wembley though, so they would both be massive. I don't know.
Yeah, but all the money's in pay-per-view, so.
Yeah, but there's a lot of money there. They don't go cheap on those pay-per-view tickets. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be an interesting little referendum, wouldn't it, if you actually had, like, both of those two things going on the same weekend or something like that, and then you've got, like, the legit heavyweight unification side. I mean, I don't think that's ever happened where you'd have, like, one guy holding all the belts at once. There's still several hurdles before you even get to that point. The other one could happen tomorrow if they wanted it to, but yeah, I don't know. It'd be a funky one if neither of them were hypothetical, if you actually booked those two types of things, and, like, put them head to head and actually saw. But I mean, it's sort of, I just can't help but feel you do more damage than good by having a lot of those, like, sort of, the exhibition-y things. You do make a lot of money, and I know greed speaks to a lot of people, but you also get a lot of people who are just watching it cynically or whatever, and, like, that's those people are idiots, because if you don't like it, don't support it. Right? The people selling the tickets don't care if you're watching it to grumble about it and say, look what boxing's become. Look, they'll give anyone a license these days. They don't care if you're saying that or if you're saying this is fun, I'm enjoying that. Like it doesn't matter. You're paying for it the same price. So that's a stupid response that people have, but people do have that response and they fill it out. I just don't know if that down the line does anything whatsoever for the sport that you're trying to promote. I think that's the kind of thing which is having a moment right now. I could see that moment burning out in a couple years though as well.
I can see Adesanya taking full advantage of that moment though. Adesanya and Joseph Parker are the same height, so probably
really?
They'll probably fight each other at some stage, I'd say.
Well, Joseph Parker's in a funny state at the moment, isn't he? Because he's had this he's supposedly going to be fighting Derek Chisora in the rematch of the decision when he got early in the year. Not knowing entirely what's happening with that right now. Chisora's changed managers. He did have David Hay. He's no longer has David Hay representing him. So that's probably slowed things down. But then Parker has been in camp with his trainer Andy Lee, who's also one of Tyson Fury's trainers, and Tyson Fury supposedly just got COVID-19, and then they've had to push back his second rematch, his third bout against Deontay Wilder, because of that. And then Dan Raphael's tweeting that others in the camp, because supposedly they said like 10 people within the wider camp, like all these people working out of the same gym, had tested positive for COVID. Dan Raphael's tweeting that sources tell him that Joseph Parker was one of them. Then Joseph Parker shows up at the McGregor-Poirier fight with like clips on his Snapchat about it, like proving that he was there. David Higgins tells the media that Parker tested negative. He never had COVID. It wasn't a deal. He obviously didn't if he was able to go to the fight. I can't imagine how that otherwise could have got around. But then that suggests like shenanigans on some part, because he then deletes his Instagram stories about it, and people start speculating as to whether maybe Tyson Fury is not, like if Parker doesn't have COVID, then does Fury actually have COVID, and is maybe he just not in the best shape and trying to find a way to postpone the fight coming up. It's not something he would. I think there has been hints of this with him before. I don't know if it's full on shenanigans, but Fury, as far as I know, hasn't, at least up until a couple of days ago, I haven't checked more recently, but hadn't like responded or acknowledged any of this. Like he hadn't come out with a post saying, yes, I've got COVID, and I might have to check in case he's done that since. But very, very strange areas, which is in keeping with the general weirdness of boxing, which is, it's weird in a fun way, but it's also weird in a like completely unnecessary way sometimes. But Joseph Parker has been swept up in all this, and I don't know exactly what he's doing at the moment anyway, or whether he's like fully healthy or sick or what's going on. It's a strange one.
So, say if I asked you right after the Joseph Parker versus Junior Fa fight, where you had Joseph Parker's, like, were you going to buy or sell Joseph Parker's stock in that moment? Versus if I asked you now, how would you feel? Like, is there a difference? And or like, where what are you doing with Joseph Parker's stock right now?
I don't know if this is the expected answer, but I think his stock has actually risen a little bit since then. I think getting the win over Junior Fa was obviously a difficult, like, kind of banana peel bout where kind of the pandemic and all this kind of forced him into a situation where he had one option for his next fight, and it was the kind of option where like he had a lot more to lose than he had to gain from that fight. He managed to get the win in tricky circumstances. Not the most impressive, but he did split with Kevin Barry after that and found a new trainer, probably the freshening up that he needed at this point in his career. And for all the like controversy about the scorecards and whatever, I did think he deserved to get the victory against Derek Chisora, and getting that win keeps him alive. And with that is like, he's trying to get quick turnarounds, but if he hadn't been in that situation, then we'd just be looking at a normal, like if he hadn't said he wanted to fight a couple more times this year, or just I think he said like he wants to get back to fighting 3 times a year or something like that, like he was doing a few years back. Like if he hadn't said that, then it wouldn't feel like we're in a delay as to what the hell's he going to do next, because it would just feel like a normal, oh, well, he's not going to fight till October anyway, so no dramas, he's just doing what he does. The COVID stuff is weird because we've already had a spider bite thing. We've had this drama with him, like there's some legal dramas where he got like mentioned in that drug ring court case thing, and the name suppression weirdness about that, where he tried to keep his name out, and then he sort of had to come out swinging, saying I'm innocent, but this is what happened, kind of thing afterwards, and lots of odd things going on around Joseph Parker. But I think in the ring, like his actual stocks for his career, I do actually think he's like his overall 2021 has seen him take a couple steps forward. So,
but is that different to when it was after the Far fight? Because all that's happened after the Far fight was he split with his coach and he's teamed up with Tyson Fury where he's got COVID. So how have things got better?
Well, because he beat Derek Chisora, and I think the splitting with the coach is a positive for him. Like, I don't see that as a negative. Often it can be where you're like the trainer is the like splitting with your trainer suggests some wider I don't know, downfall or whatever. It's a desperate move or whatever. I don't think that was the case with Joseph Parker. I think it was overdue, and he made the wise, progressive kind of like, you know, forward-thinking move for his career, and acknowledging that something like needed freshening up there. And I see that as a positive for him. And I think that the one over Chisora wasn't like special or anything. It wasn't like Andy Lee suddenly come in and done amazing things for Parker. But I mean, I don't think you can really expect that on the first fight without even a full proper training camp because of the quarantine things that around having to, you know, fight in the UK and all this. Like I still, yeah, I think he's moving in the right direction. It's just everything's kind of on pause at the moment because no one really knows what's going to go on with the heavyweight division until Joshua and Fury fight. Like, up until that point, it's kind of like everything's on hold waiting for how things are going to show up, because people want to be the guy to fight the next guy, or like position themselves to be the mandatory afterwards. And there's probably a high likelihood that Tyson Fury, if he did beat Anthony Joshua, might just retire on the spot, in which case he would be the unanimous champ for a day, and then there'd be like 5 bouts suddenly available for everybody to go out and compete for. And that's kind of how, well, that's basically exactly how Joseph Parker got his bout in the first place, was Tyson Fury vacated it, and then Parker swooped in on a you know, fighting for the vacant belt there, and beaten Andy Ruiz in what is not a classic title matchup. It's not like both of them have done things since then, but at that time you wouldn't have looked at that as anything other than 2 contenders hoping for a shot, and seeing that there was actually a bout on the line was kind of nuts and very convenient. But that could be a situation that plays itself out in 2022. So Parker's just kind of keep himself in the mix, and you know, so far so good on that front.
So it just seems like you just explained why boxing's a bit dumb.
I did, yeah. 5 different governing bodies, and none of them agree with each other. They're always like, everyone thinks their bout's a little bit better than the other, and someone has to vacate one because they want to fight for another, and all these little bits of weirdness. It's definitely one thing that the streamlined version of the UFC, where everyone is like, that has its problems too. There's definitely like fighters aren't getting paid enough. Like that's pretty clear. They're not getting a big enough cut of the overall kitty there. But from a promotion and matchup perspective, it's so much easier when everything's done in-house like that. You could just make the best guys fight each other. Like, you don't have to worry about conflicting managements and conflicting like belts and schedules and things like that. It's like everyone works to the calendar of the UFC, and it's just so much more convenient.
Rightio, we have a couple more Kiwi-NRL debutants named in the NRL this week. So we've already had 8 this year. Last year we had 14. This year we have 8. Edward Kosi, Rocco Berry, Taniela Otakulo, Wiramu Greg, Samisa Sangi, Tisi Robati, Greg Mazhu, and Falakiko Manu. This week, West Tigers have named Junior Ponga at centre and Tukimihia Simpkins on the bench. And given how the West Tigers have performed this year, probably long overdue because the West Tigers suck. And that's a bit weird because they have the Kiwis coach Michael Maguire leading their charge, but it is what it is. Junior Ponga. He started with the Warriors. He was playing for Kelston Boys High School and got picked up into the Warriors. Then he was a really good player for the Warriors under 20s. Didn't quite kick on at the Warriors. Left for Wynnum Manly Seagulls, which is a reserve grade team in Brisbane, who are affiliated with the Broncos, and that's where TC Robati played after leaving Wellington, and he got put into the Broncos system through Wynnum, so Wynnum's a pretty good club. And Junior Ponga was playing there for a few years, and then he played 4 games for Wynnum to start this season, and was then signed by West Tigers. And now he is starting in the NRL at centre. So obviously the West Tigers have seen something in Junior Ponga that warranted an NRL deal and has seen him come into the NRL team. I always thought he was a good prospect. Like he's not massive, but he's powerful, he's quick, he's nimble-footed, and I think that I'm interested to see how he goes in the NRL, but all credit to him. And Tukimihia Simpkins, fantastic prospect out of Rotorua Boys High School. He was mainly playing first 15, but he does have a bit of a rugby league background. North Queensland Cowboys signed him out of Rotorua. North Queensland Cowboys do a great job of signing players from around Aotearoa. Right now, they have Griffin Niami from Greymouth, who will hopefully make his debut this year if the Cowboys keep being shit as well. And then Simpkins left the Cowboys during last summer. So Todd Payton gets to the Cowboys, and then Tukimihia Simpkins leaves. He goes to West Tigers, and now here he is. He's played a lot of reserve grade. I think he's played like 50 or 60 minutes in every reserve grade game as a middle forward. He's tall, he's big, he's skillful, and fantastic work ethic. So he is also named to debut. Interestingly there, and I think I've read about this in the emails, how the West Tigers don't have Kiwi-NRL players from who they have recruited or who they have scouted and recruited. They have a lot of players in reserve grade primarily who they have signed from other clubs. Junior Ponga, one of those players. He was signed from Wynnum. Tukimihia Simpkins, another one of those players, signed from the Cowboys. And neither of them were on the Tigers roster to start 2021. Like 1st of January 2021, neither of them were on the West Tigers roster. Now they're here getting ready to make an NRL debut, and that will give us 10 NRL debutants this year after round 18.
So how does that compare to recent years for the overall tallies?
I've only been keeping count since last year, and last year we had 14. So I think we can pass that this year because
on track.
There is a fantastic player with the Broncos who may make his debut in this game. Xavier Willison is named on the extended bench. They are playing against the Tigers, and he is fantastic. He is from Hamilton. Did the last few years of his schooling at Palm Beach Currumbin on the Gold Coast, was an absolute beast there after leaving Hamilton, and then he signed with the Broncos last year. He was just out of high school, and he did like a summer train and trial situation with the Broncos. Was played in one of their trial games, and I didn't expect to see him close to the NRL this year, but he's a massive dude. And the Broncos actually have TC Robati from Wellington, Jordan Ricky from Christchurch, and Xavier Willison from Hamilton. They are all absolute monsters. Griffin Niami's another one on the fringe with the Cowboys. There is Jira Momosia with the Newcastle Knights. The Newcastle Knights always recruit, well, they have a lot of Kiwi-NRL players from Auckland, and Jira Momosia is one of those players. There's another dude, Fahu White, who has been named on the extended bench for the Roosters a few times this year. He is another Kelston Boys High School product, and he is on the fringes of the Roosters. So just with those names I mentioned, so we'll have 10 if Ponga and Simpkins play. Then we have Willison, Momosia, and White, and Niami. That's 14. If Willison, Momosia, White, and Niami make their debuts this season, that's 14 again. Let alone anyone else who comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, which could very easily happen as well. Like that's pretty fantastic, eh? Like I'm just thinking about how that compares to this. Like, probably the next thing I'll write will be like more preparation about the Olympic football squads that New Zealand is sending over there. They're already over there and playing friendly games beforehand and stuff like that. And I was doing Flying Kiwis, like writing that up on Monday and Tuesday morning, and looking at, like, just thinking, because you've got all these players in, like, the Football Ferns is a Olympic team that's a full senior international team. So basically everyone's there who's playing right now. And then the men's team is under 24s for this tournament, but with a couple overage players, and like a lot of the All Whites team would be from that under 24 range anyway. Like there's guys like Callum McCowdy, like Joe Bell, Sarpreet Singh isn't there, but he would be. Whereas club situation a little easier for him. Like guys like this Libby Kakache, like Michael Val, like guys like this would be in a All Whites squad, if not starting 11 anyway. So it's a pretty big crossover, and just like all these players have been taken out of the Flying Kiwis pool. Like as recently as probably 2 years ago, I would have had nothing to write about, you know. Where you take 44 of the top New Zealand footballers out of their professional clubs for a couple weeks. Like there would be no Flying Kiwis. I managed to get 10 entries in last week. Like, a couple of those were players like Abby Ursig, Ali Riley, Vic Hesson playing their last games before going to the Olympics. But even still, like, there's no shortage of stuff to write about. And that was with, like, Bill Tuiloma didn't have a game last week. You know, his team had a bye that weekend. Like, he'll be back next week. There's preseason stuff with teams based in Europe, and just the sheer quantity of footballers just coming through. There's always, every now and then, there's a new signing that'll just catch you out of the blue, where you're like, oh, this dude got a contract. Okay, well, sweet as. Let's see how this goes. Like, Jamie Searle's a good example of that. I don't think he played a lot of like New Zealand youth football coming up. He wasn't in like the under 20 squads for the last couple. He might have been in like wider qualifying groups and stuff like that. But he got signed by Aston Villa as a academy goalkeeper 2 years ago. Spent 1 year with them, moved to Swansea, just been re-signed again by Swansea after a very good year with their under 23s. He's 20 playing under 23s. Like, and he's in the he's the backup keeper now at the Olympics. Like, he was not in this frame 2 years ago to be like on this trajectory, and he comes out of nowhere like that. There's cases like that all the time, and NRL, I got to imagine it's even more like that, because you get so many people who like kids basically who move over to Australia on opportunities, and then you just like slowly move up the ranks, and one day you're playing NRL footy. It's kind of this, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for how to describe it. It's just like this procession, you know. It's just like there's just more guys coming through all the time.
Yeah, and it's that's why Like, I definitely check under 18 team lists. I definitely check under 21 team lists and have knowledge of how the New South Wales and Queensland competitions look at that level and who some of the players from New Zealand are who are getting recruited. Like, by that I mean I know kinda almost everyone. But just I'm saying it in a less nerdy way. But I don't view it like that's just kind of background information. It's not necessarily important information, because the important information is what happens solely at the crossover between reserve grade and NRL. Because players can come from anywhere, players can fall off at any stage, and there might be just a dude who pops up into reserve grade and I've never heard of him and I've never checked out his Kiwi-NRL credentials, which is something that I have just completely made up. So always keep that in mind. I just have invented Kiwi-NRL as a way of identifying these players who played their junior footy or have some intention to represent Aotearoa as an alternative. And so you just, to be honest, what used to happen, as bad as this sounds, you could literally just look for Polynesian or Māori names. And as bad and as racist and just terrible as that sounds, there wasn't the Polynesian base from Australia to complicate it, and all the players from New Zealand, it was kind of the reason that happened is because it worked every time. Now you just have to there's players with European names, there's players with all sorts of different names, and you don't a lot of these Polynesian players are born and raised in Australia, so you just gotta. There's just so many. It's so much harder to actually identify the Kiwi-NRL players over in Australia because there's just so many more, and they come from such a wider backdrop, and they come from throughout New Zealand as opposed to just Auckland. And the dude from Canterbury, so there's a dude at Canberra Raiders who was playing. He was part of their under-18 championship team this year. A dude from Christchurch Boys High School, first 15, Jack Sanford. And if I look at a team list, this is where I'm at now, where I actually have to kind of Google every name, where I have to just look for press releases with squad announcements as to where this player's come from. Or there's a site 18th Man which has all the ins and outs for under 18s and under 20s, and you can kind of see Canberra Raiders signed this player from Christchurch Boys High School, first 15. And that's how you find out. But if you saw Jack Sanford at fullback for the Canberra Raiders under 18s, and you had no prior knowledge, you just assumed that he was a dude from Canberra. No, he is a dude from Canterbury who the Raiders scouts have viewed as a really good prospect because they signed him, they brought him across to Canberra. At the same time, they signed a dude, Sione Moala, who was with the Warriors. It's just so varied, and these dudes come from all backgrounds and all locations, and first 15 rugby, club rugby league, school rugby league, and they're all just kind of being funneled into the NRL. And given the perils of junior sport, you kind of have to just focus on the entry to NRL as a way to judge those players and assess where they sit in the NRL.
Yeah, Jack Sanford could easily be a character from Home and Away or Neighbours or something. Eh? On a sidebar, I've got a page whipped open on my phone right here that I was looking up earlier when we were talking about the boxing stuff, and I might as well squeeze it in beforehand. I was looking up Tyson Fury to see if he had acknowledged anything, and there was he did a Twitter video this morning apparently, because he won an ESPY. Congratulations, Tyson Fury, on that prestigious honor. He won an ESPY award. and he sort of did a thank you video for that and saying like it's a pity that the fight's been postponed, blah blah blah. He doesn't actually mention whether or not he's got COVID or anything like that. Doesn't look particularly ill, but of course that's not really a factor. You can be carrying it without having the like symptoms. That's not the point, but more strange areas there. But then I thought I'd look up Junior Fa to see what he's up to, and then the most recent thing I can find on Junior Fa is a Fox Sports article where it's talking about Justice Huni, so the dude we were talking about who dropped Paul Gallen. He is apparently promoted by Dean Lonergan, so there's one Kiwi connection. Dean Lonergan has a quote in this article saying, "At this stage, I don't expect Paul Gallen to take up the rematch that's available to him, so we're looking at Kiwis Hemi Io and Junior Fa as Justice's next couple of opponents." So there's another Kiwi connection, is the idea that basically City Kickboxing's two premier heavyweights, Io and Fa, being potentially lined up as options for this Huni fella's next fight. And the other thing is Huni was supposed to be going to the Olympics, but he had a hand injury which required surgery. If he had gone to the Olympics, he very well could have ended up fighting David Nika as well, because they're in the same heavyweight division there. So funky times there. It's a strange one. And then, of course, his last opponent, Paul Gallen, is very obviously hoping to fight Sonny Bill Williams at some point down the line in what would be a step above the exhibition type stuff we're talking about before, because, Gallen's paid his dues in the ring. Sonny Bill's paid his dues in the ring, at least beforehand. I don't think Sonny Bill's very confident about it at the moment. I think he probably feels he needs a couple touch-up fights before he gets his boxing legs back under him. But there's another Kiwi connection there in a little bit more of a abstract way, but weirdness, more boxing weirdness, we'll say, but a couple funky ones in terms of how New Zealand boxers, especially, I would actually love that, because Justice Huni's a pretty solid prospect. He's a very good, up-and-coming heavyweight fighter. If he got a crack at Junior Fa, that'd be pretty cool. If he got a crack at Hemi Io, that'd be even cooler in a way, because you have two guys, Junior Fa's a step above that. He might be a guy to fight down the line. Hemi Io, to see him get that opportunity, Fa can get opportunities. He's fought Joseph Parker. Hemi Io hasn't had that opportunity yet to be on a main card where people are actually going to be watching. That would be amazing. I would love that if that fight came around. So
everything you just described there is a reason boxing is done. No, I'm joking about that. Your whole point there was connections to New Zealand. So when you consider, it's not just the UFC. There's a JJ Wilson in Bellator, and there's Gina Fabian from City Kickboxing. She's in the Professional Fighting League as well. But that, in summary of the Niche Cage as of July 15, 2021, that is exactly the same as what's happening in the NRL. That is exactly the same as what's happening in football. That's exactly the same as what we're seeing in cricket. We have just come off a month and a bit more where the Black Caps used 17 players in a Test series win over England, where the Black Caps won the World Test Championship final, where Black Caps and just New Zealand cricketers are performing in the T20 Blast, where you imagine a T20 team and there's 20 players competing for a first 11. Now we've got county cricket, and there's Kiwis doing well in county cricket. Throw in any other sporting, basketball. We are here talking about how many Kiwi basketballers there are. We've got the Ledger Walker ladies and other ladies competing in the NCAA and professionally. This shit is absolutely on fire. And we joked about how there was a football golden generation. You cover it, but I had to kind of put that out into the ether and make sure that was known. But the truth is, we are in a golden generation across all of the sports. There's just there is no, I'm sure if we got deep into it, we could see a sport that's having a dip in their talent numbers and their professional opportunities. But we'd have to get deep in it to find a sport or a pocket of Kiwi sports that is having that dip. And to be honest, it might just be like rugby and netball that are having a dip. If we
exactly the two
if
sports
we were
that
going
came to my
deep
mind.
into it, I think that's my hypothesis is that's what we would find. But just focusing on like where the plenty is, where the abundance is, it's in absolute like golden generation across multiple different sports. Just from New Zealand, it's pretty amazing.
And we're saying this 1 week out from an Olympic Games as well. So just like imagine what we might be saying where you get so many sports where the Olympics is the peak and you spend 4 years training for it. And those years in between Olympic Games is you don't, like, unless you're Tom Walsh or Valerie Adams, who's going to be like doing impressive things at like Diamond League level and staying in the news every now and then because of their, I guess, like celebrity within New Zealand sports. Like, unless you're someone on that top tier like that who can command headlines throughout, you kind of get forgotten in those in-between years. But then you come into the Olympics and like, if you win a medal, sorted. Like you're going to get endorsements, you're going to get sponsorships, you're going to have people like helping you out. Next time your funding will go up or whatever. Like if you can win a medal, that's, and not like, let alone the fact that that's the peak of your career right there, an Olympic medal, for those kind of sports, like where the Olympics is the top of the hill. Imagine what we might be saying in 2 more weeks, or what we're going to be saying over the course of our, our almost daily, Patreon podcast updates, talking about some of these sports that we don't normally, get to talk about. And so we don't necessarily see the growth or the depth that we might have there. And the athletes who make it to the very top to compete in Olympic Games, but like they're about to get their spotlight, in a week's time. And that's a whole new avenue of exactly what we're talking about some more.
Kia kaha. We'll finish there. Stay beautiful. Enjoy the winter, the depths of winter that are about to be warmed up with the cozy embrace of ample sport. Church.